if we start with the first question, if you don't mind, just name, job
Yeah,
title,
no, not at
and
all.
your area of responsibility.
Bernard Tompkins, Corporate Sales Manager for Public Sector at ALD Automotive.
Cool, thank you. So, from a general point of view, before we sort of speak specifically about the public sector, how would you describe ALD Automotive, and what do you think the company does for fleets?
Okay, it's a very hackneyed phrase, and not one I like to use very much, but it does genuinely offer a one-stop shop
Yep.
for fleets. And what I mean by that is that we have a raft of products which can actually cater to most fleet needs, so that you can literally choose us as a fleet partner, and you can be very effective and efficient in running your fleet through all of the products that we have, and we can take a lot of the strain and the pain away from companies, particularly those that don't have dedicated fleet management processes in place.
Right, that's good. Okay. So going into obviously the sector you look after, specifically public sector,
Yeah,
and so it would be good to get your view, broad brush view of the public sector generally,
sure.
then obviously where we focus and what the considerations we should be making when trying to engage with them, for example.
Yeah. Okay, so public sector is made up of various different organisational groups: central government, local authorities, local government. Then you have education, and that ranges right from the smallest school right through to many universities. Then you have housing associations, charities, NHS trusts, and blue light generally. And that tends to be the public sector. It is a bit quirky though, because we do get a number of private companies who have got contracts with public sector bodies, and we are allowed therefore to consider that part of the operation they have as being part of the public sector. And what that means in essence is they're able to use the support terms which are specifically in place for public sector. But we need to be careful about that. Public sector, the way that it works is really simple, ultimately, although everyone thinks it's complicated, it's really not. That is that because the money that is being spent is not the organisation's money. It's derived from elsewhere, whether it be government money, or whether in the case of, for example, charity, it's charitable money, or in the case of housing associations, it's money that basically comes from the rental and therefore from their shareholders. They have to prove, in inverted commas, best value. And what that means is not cheapest. It means that they are able to demonstrate really clearly that they've gone through a process to actually establish that the deal that they're getting, no matter what it's for, whether it's for leasing or staples or paper, is the best that they can get. That means, therefore, that it's a qualitative and a quantitative process that they have to undergo. And there are certain levels in place of monies that they have to spend, and over those levels they've got to do various things. So it basically anything over £10,000 has to be tendered for. Anything below £10,000 doesn't have to be. So you have to, and by tendered it means you've got to get at least 3 quotes in every case, and you don't necessarily always choose the cheapest. It's the one that fits and is best value for you. And then when you actually get into sort of tens of thousands of pounds, those tenders have to be publicly announced through various different processes, so that all of the SMEs and large companies like ourselves have availability to be able to quote on those as well. So it's not a closed shop, basically.
And is that's the framework you're talking about there, is it?
The frameworks are slightly different to that, in that the reason the framework came about, the first was actually generated by the Cabinet Office, so it's by government themselves, and their rationale for doing it was that they found that central government agencies were spending a lot of time in tendering because it's quite a costly and lengthy process. So they decided what they would do is they would put a central framework together, or a central tendering process together. That has now become Crown Commercial Services, or CCS as we know it, and that is in essence tendered every 4 years. So we as a supplier will retender on a 4-yearly basis. And if we're lucky enough, we get onto that tender. What it does for the organisations is it means that they don't have to go through the tendering process. They have a simple process to actually go and advertise the fact that they want people to tell them whether or not you can actually match them and partner with them to do certain things. And then they can choose the ones that they think work best for them. From our point of view, it gives us the ability to actually use the support terms, which are specifically for Crown Commercial Services. You can only do that if you're on the framework, however. So if we were excluded from the framework any stage, we wouldn't be able to be in that sort of privileged position of using those support terms.
Yeah.
What's then happened over the years is that more frameworks have developed. The two most major ones are TPPL, which is the Procurement Partnership Limited, and another which is called Halton Housing. What they are, in essence, both of them, Halton Housing is run by Link Group and TPPL is run by themselves. They partner with a public sector body. So in the terms of TPPL, they partner with Hertfordshire County Council. They're the lead on it. And in terms of the Halton Housing is a housing association. So there has to be a public sector body associated with the framework always.
Yeah.
But in these cases, there are private sector bodies that are running those frameworks on behalf of those public sector bodies. And if you like, they're sort of in competition with the main CCS framework. And the rationale for it is that it gives more option to public sector bodies to look at other frameworks. What in essence it means now, the way that it's shaken out, is that central government organisations are mandated to use Crown Commercial Services framework because it's part of the government, whereas all other public sector bodies can choose the framework which best suits them, or they can still, if they want to, go to tender individually if they wish to do so, basically, and some do still.
Oh.
But in essence, in short, the rationale for the frameworks is to try and make life easier and more cost effective for the public sector organisations. And the spin-off for us is it gives us a fairly unique position in that we are one of a few suppliers on each of those who therefore has access to the support terms that are engendered by the framework.
Right. So you've got the framework, and you mentioned that obviously some still go out to tender separately.
Yeah.
I guess that's when you refer back to sort of announcing tenders.
Yeah.
And I assume if they're a big tender and it's on the framework, they still have to announce it as well?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still has to be announced. It was, until recently, it was something called European Journal. Yeah. And so now that we've parted ways with the European Journal,
yeah,
it's announced through a government process which is basically linked to CCS. So it's an announcement on a daily basis of tenders which are coming up, and it will tell you whether or not they are open tenders through a framework or whether they're individual standalone tenders as well.
Right.
And then with the individual standalone tenders, we have the right to use the support terms from any of the frameworks we want to, if we wish to, basically.
Yeah, okay. So, but the advantage that what we're trying to do is build awareness so that when they do issue these tenders, whether it's through framework or independent, we're at least in their mind.
Yeah, and to give you an analogy, when I first came to ALD, I came from having been in the process of setting up public sector for a number of different companies like Arval and various others. ALD was not at all well known in public sector circles because we had very few public sector customers. I mean, we've got Salvation Army, we've got British Heart Foundation, and we've got one or two others, large charitable groups that we've had for many years, which is good for me because it was great information that we could use. And just as an aside, I was thinking yesterday after you and I had this conversation, they would actually make some good information for us to actually use. They've been with us for such a long time, for so many years. They're public sector bodies. Yeah. We must be able to get some case studies out of those guys, I would have thought. But that's...
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, definitely. At least that's funny. I've got some thoughts on that. So.
Yeah. But then, so basically, the way I saw my job was twofold. One was to actually get us onto the frameworks because we weren't on any, and then secondly to begin the process of actually building awareness of ALD. And it was very much the case that I was reaching out to people I'd known through other companies, and they were all saying the same thing: never heard of ALD. Who are they? You know. Luckily, we've got a strong story because ALD is a large company, just become even larger by the looks of it as well, isn't it? You know. Yeah. And we have a very strong story, and the concept of being backed by a French bank is always good news because you've got stable money and all the rest of it. Yeah. Although I always used to have the joke about, shame it's French, but there we go. And so what I began to do over a period of time, and frankly, it was all just sweat and hard work, was build awareness. Yeah. Because my frustration was that the CCS framework runs a portal so that anybody which is signed up to CCS is able to actually go onto that portal and actually choose a vehicle, and they will choose a vehicle normally about the cheapest, or 2 or 3 at the top. Even if we became at the top, because they didn't know us, they wouldn't choose us, basically, And so my frustration was I could get regular output of information, and we were looking at something like 20,000 quotes per month being generated through that portal. Yeah. And similar amounts of vehicles, 25, 35,000 vehicles a year being actually sort of won. And we were winning very few. And so it was a big job to be done. So the way that I approached it was I looked at those organisations that were using the portal most often and taking the most number of vehicles. They became my target, basically. So I spent the first years, as it were, actually going around physically, knocking on doors, talking to people about who we were, what we were. And then gradually over a period of time, they began to understand that we were actually, a decent company, not probably shop liver, as it were. And we began then to actually get more and more opportunity to actually win business through the portals. Yeah. What that then does is it gives me more opportunity to talk about us in terms of our public sector portfolio, because it was virtually zero when I joined. Yeah. Now we've got something like 300 or 400 customers, which is great, and I can say with some, truth that, we have a lot of customers who are sort of working with us in various different guises. And that leads to the next and probably most important bit, and that is that working on winning more tenders. And, the past couple of years we've done really well. We've won a lot of good tenders recently. And I think that the significance of, the conversation that you and I are having right now shouldn't be missed, and the fact that our largest single customer at ALD is now Northumbria Healthcare. And simply put, one of the most important things I can't stress enough is that the work that I did with you guys and Alex specifically got us to where we were with that customer, because it was through LinkedIn and the campaigns that we were doing, the public sector campaigns, that regenerated their awareness of us and made them revisit us, as it were, in terms of our pricing, and said, oh, actually, you guys are quite good. Come and talk to us, and off we go, basically, from that. So, and that's the truth, and I do spread that story widely, I must say, as well. Yeah. And so, I think it's a good analogy of the whole process as well, isn't it, really? And that is that it's about awareness, and with that awareness then comes a bit more confidence, and then it's just growing relationships as much as anything else.
No, that's the thing it is about, and that's the thing, it's awareness, building credibility, and just getting in there. And it takes time. It does take time.
Yeah.
One thing is interesting you said about having a good fit, best fit. That's something, and it comes back to perhaps one of the questions is, how would you describe our fit with public sector, with the with the organisations that we're working with that you engaged with?
I would say that it is now much better than it ever was, and the reason it is because there's a massive concentration on electrification of vehicles at the moment, and this is a primary function of anybody working on a public sector organisation. They are mandated to actually become fully electrified and to decarbonise in a very specific period of time. And so it isn't sort of like a wish list, it's a necessity. They have to do it. And so what they're looking for is they're looking for partnerships where what they will actually gain from that partnership is much greater than you would normally expect. In other words, it's not just a vehicle that they want.
Yeah.
They want knowledge, they want expertise, they want basically assistance, and they also want to be able to trust in the fact and the knowledge that the partnerships that they engender will actually help them to achieve their goals.
Yeah.
And so, if you like, it's a two-level strategy, the way that I think about it. And that is that the people that we talk to at the first level, what I'm really trying to do is empower them as much as anything else. So that they become experts in the field, and they get knowledge that they wouldn't have had before, and they can tell all of the people they work with how wonderful they are, and they're seen as being wondrous, and that they will credit us with that internally, maybe not externally, you know. The second level.
Just jump in there.
Yeah.
It's funny you say, because that's exactly what we're trying to do at the moment, and which work that we're doing. It is about spinning it around and saying, you know, trying to position to the targets that, you know, this is information that will help you with your career, you know, tapping to that personal side, as well as this will help you build your business case and be seen as that expert, and to help check, and in effect with the decarbonisation side of things, help actually drive real business change, real business benefit beyond that your actual role at this moment, being a fleet manager, perhaps. So that absolutely is you know the approach that we're trying to take as well generally.
And it's what you might consider to be quite small things that are making us, I think, a little stand out a bit more. And one thing that I understood quite early on that Russ did, I think it was with Places for People, was this driver suitability research. And I saw immediately that this is really, really good, because a lot of customers will not be thinking about that end of it. They'll be thinking about electrification, but they won't actually be thinking far enough ahead to actually think about what does it actually mean physically. If let's say 50% of my workforce take their vehicles home, and then 50% of that 50% can't actually have chargers at home, what do we do? You know, so you know there's a real necessity for them to actually look at the way they do it. So much so, what I'm finding fascinating is a lot of them are actually considering changing working practice now, so that rather than having large vehicles with their drivers carrying lots of goods around in them, they're now reverting to having those goods delivered to the place where the driver will be working, and the driver having a small vehicle to actually go around, things like that. So there's
that's interesting.
So I mean, you know, they're sort of impressed stock in vehicles is becoming less popular, and just-in-time delivery is becoming much more interesting from their point of view, you know, and that sort of thing. So, and that's the sort of, you know, the sort of quality we can bring is to engender that sort of change of thought, and that's born out of things like, you know, driver suitability research, and what vehicles are available, and all of the great stuff that we get out of our business team. You know, I mean, like, I have to say that, you know, I've done a number of State of the Nation presentations to prospects who I know, I mean, all of them I targeted were actually going to tender during 2022. So none of them have come to fruition yet, but I know that they will be during this year going to tender. And in every case, they have suddenly become, how can I put it, not best mates, but they are friends via LinkedIn, and we share information and stuff like that. And, you know, so, hi Bernard, what do you think about, and that sort of stuff. And I think it's because I did it at such a time in their cycle that they didn't see an immediate demand from me for a return, you know. I mean, in my mind there is, you know, but in their mind there wasn't, you know. It was feeding information, and they didn't have to give me anything back at all, apart from themselves to be there, you know. And that.
sorry, I just jumping in again. That is absolutely where we're at as well, and that's what we're trying to educate people is that you know at any one time there's a small number of target customers that are actually in market. Really, everybody
Yeah,
else is somewhere down the line. If you
yeah,
just focus on that small, you're never going to find them anyway, or you'd be
mm,
very lucky to find them. So the whole thing is think about the pipeline, think about that. Don't sell. Sell through knowledge, through support, but don't always be closing as there's a famous quote.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what we were trying to get across. But that does mean that you've got to be thinking a year to 2 to 3 years ahead.
yeah,
That's exactly what
indeed.
we're saying.
Yeah.
And it's trying
And
to that
what
balance.
that also does is it gives this sort of almost emulsification to the process in that we might not then be the cheapest when we go
Yeah,
to tender,
yeah,
but they will already know that we can offer a lot more
yeah,
and there's much more to us than just what they can see on paper to
yeah,
some extent, you know. And one of the most powerful things that's happened recently is, I think I mentioned this when we spoke earlier yesterday, is I've been given permission to actually say in recent tenders that we will join you on your journey to electrification. We'll ensure that you're kept up to date with what's available. And should the right vehicles become available mid-contract, we will happily help you into those new vehicles and we won't charge any early termination fees, basically. And that's on 3 different occasions when I've had an initial implementation meeting, that phrase was one of the things that really won it for us, quite
yeah,
frankly. And it's so simple, really, but it just, I think, proves that it's about partnership rather than just about pure greed, as it were, to
yeah,
some extent.
yeah,
But no, so it's. I mean, I personally, I'm really gratified about the fact that we've actually been able to build a platform now, and we're now recognised much more as being sort of like a legitimate public sector leasing company.
yeah.
And so going from there, I mean, I think Simon's joined us at a great time personally, because
And all the hard
good
work,
luck to him. Well, it makes sense though,
yeah.
Jonathan, because I couldn't possibly cover all of the
No,
potential prospects. It's just not
no,
physically possible.
no, no. Well, that's good. I'm hoping that with the work that we're starting to develop, that we can help drive that more. And as I say, that hopefully we've got some resource that could also backfill where you haven't got that cover, so that we
Yeah,
get that longer pipeline as
yeah,
well. So
yeah, yeah.
life becomes easier in inverted commas.
Mm.
Okay, no, that's cool. Um, so I have another question on. I can't remember that bit now. Right. Anyway, so one of the questions is about talking about one or two, so one of the fleets, to go into a little bit more detail about them.
Yeah.
And I guess Places for People is one that's talked about quite a lot. So I don't know if you could give us a little bit more information on that. Firstly, just a bit of background on their business, just real top level.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So Places for People Group Limited are the largest housing association in the UK. Fleet size is about, I don't know, probably now close to 1,600 or so vehicles, maybe more, growing on a daily basis. As a unit, as a business, they're massively ambitious, and they grow by acquisition. And interestingly, for a housing association, it's not merely acquisition of other housing associations, but they buy companies which they see to be relevant to their businesses. For example, I went and visited a new company they took on right at the very beginning, and this company make modular homes. And you'd think,
yeah,
what on earth has that got to do with housing association? But it makes absolute sense, because they literally can build a brand new modular home, which is rated as high as any brick-built home
yeah,
within 2 days, and then stick it on the back of a truck and actually transport it. And they can actually build sort of like almost like a village in no time whatsoever. And there was absolute rationale to them being part of it. What they also do is they buy leisure centres, which are at the centre of their housing association buildings and things like that. So massive spin-offs and that sort of thing. Places for People used to be a customer of ours some years ago. We lost them based on purely on pricing at tender. and they went to one of our opposition customers. So when it came up for tender through the TPPL framework, obviously everybody was very keen to try to win them back. And interestingly enough, one of the major reasons we won them back was through 360. And I know it's not often we hear praise of 360, is it? But and the rationale was, obviously, they'd been through a process of 4.5 years with one of our competitive customers who had claimed that they had this system that was better than ours, and in reality was absolutely rubbish. And so, and they'd already had a taste of what 360 could do. It had advanced somewhat in the 4 years. So we obviously had to be competitive on pricing. We also had to be in the right area in terms of things like social value and everything. But one of the major things we did, we concentrated on what we could do with them for the 360, because they're a very complex company. And so we were able to offer them the ability to have like a group account and then many subsidiary accounts underneath, which could actually be individually billed or billed centrally. So there was quite a lot of flexibility built into that. And that was important for them. The other thing that was important was there are two sides as far as their business is concerned. They have a large number of light commercial vehicles, and so they wanted to work with a partner that understood LCVs, and so obviously our consultant team were quite heavily involved at the time. What we did was something that I do always is I work very collaboratively at this stage, in that if we are in the throes of a tender, what I'll do first of all is put a group together internally, which will be, for instance, Russ, for example, someone in the new business team, people in maintenance and that sort of thing, tell them about what the tender is about so I can get real feedback about whether or not we can cope. And then we'll choose our external partners, such as the manufacturers and also the converters, and we'll get them involved prior to tendering as well. So it's a really collaborative effect, so that by the point we get to tender, and if we win, that group's quite used to each other anyway and working together. So what we're able to do is very quickly put a really smooth process in place whereby they worked through Peugeots. The Peugeots were delivered. They went straight into the converter from port, and then the delivering dealer, which was Robinson Day, were able then to organise delivery straight to the customer. So it cut out a lot of steps. And that's now been going on for 5 years, and it's still working really well for them as well. Everything is working well. The other side of the business is that they have the opportunity, many people within the business have an opportunity to choose a car as part of their perks, and so they all can use 360, and that works really well for them basically, and they can have a user chooser scheme, and the vehicles can be chosen very simply, quoted on, chosen, and off they go basically. So it's much easier than anything they've had before. So the whole thing fits very well. And what I think is exciting now, I mean, I'm not close to them anymore because obviously I bring them on and then I walk away and Diane manages them. But I like to keep an understanding, and what's exciting for me now is what we were talking about yesterday, is that Russ is now working with them quite closely on moving to electric vehicles and generating information. Like I know that they did that user suitability survey with them, that sort of thing. And so it is genuinely about partnership, and that gives us an opportunity, I think, to actually compare them. The direct spin-off of that is that we've recently won the largest Scottish housing association, who are called the Wheatley Group, and they have a potential for nearly 500 vehicles, and so we'll be starting to actually place orders for them this month, I'm pleased to say. One of the reasons for us winning Wheatley Group was because we are PFPs, the Places for People's incumbent, because they see themselves as being potentially as complicated in terms of their organisational structures as Places for People are, basically. And they did talk directly with Places for People about how we were managing their account and how it was working for them. And in a similar way, Wheatley Group will be very similar in that they'll have an LCV fleet of just about coming up to 500. They're quite avaricious. They're growing by acquisition, but they will also have the ability to use 360 for cars for their own user chooser scheme as well. what attracted them also was, this was one of the ones where we used the phrase where, we won't charge early termination fees, so we're working with them already, one might say. And the other thing that they find attractive is that we're now in a position where we can talk to them when we get to that point of transfer to electric vehicles about not just the vehicle but the charging process as well as a package. And they find that really, really exciting because they don't want to have to go and do that whole infrastructure search themselves. They would rather someone like us brings it to them, basically.
Yeah. Just the electrification part, is there any issue? Because obviously, there's a rush to electrify, and there's still those questions around charging, in particular range, delivery, and especially, I guess, with LCV. When it comes to loads and that type of stuff. Has that come up a lot in terms of, because obviously now we've got Charge Plus, we can deal with the home charging, we can deal with depot charging. Is that something that is opening up to us now, for example?
No. Yes and no. Yes and no. Now, in terms of most LCV flutes, not yet.
Yeah.
Because they're not quite ready for it, basically. There are only a very small proportion of their current vehicles that could easily be replaced by current electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And so if you like, they're on the verge of it. We're probably 24 months away from being there.
Okay.
And so what excites me about that is that current customers that I'm implementing, such as Wheatley, City of Lincoln, Tykalon, that we've all recently won, they will be really good for us because it will be almost mid-contract where they'll be saying, right, or rather we'll be saying to them, we've done this analysis, we've got a group of 50 vehicles that would really suit this type of electric vehicle well because of the range and the load that's applicable, and here's the package we can put together for you, basically. So I think it's almost like learning on the job, isn't it, really, to some extent?
Yeah.
It's a bit different if the with the CAMs at the moment, their role is a bit different because obviously they've got a lot of customers who are purely cars, and so that's transitional now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas a load of the stuff I'm doing in public sector at the moment seems to be LCVs, and so with the exception of Northumbria, which is all cars, of course. And Northumbria have already got an arrangement with E.ON in terms of charging anyway.
Yeah.
But no, that's. I think that whole process will be good, and part of my PDP, my growth for self, as it were, is I want to understand in more detail how that's going to work for the customer.
Yeah.
Because I want to be confident that I can actually explain to them how the process works.
Yeah.
I'm being asked questions already, such as there's one Tykalon where we went and visited them, and they've got this huge depot, and they're sort of saying, we can do charging here, can't we? And immediately, because of the training I'd had, said, well, potentially yes, but what you're going to have to do is find out whether or not the incoming electricity source is great enough for you to be able to do that sort of thing, So, and they went, oh God, we never thought of that, So it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that's one of the charging side of things is one of the next really big opportunities. Now that we've got a point with the EVs in their mindset and coming into fleet, and home charging is fine, but then when you move to, as long as people can charge at home, so that's another challenge and maybe an opportunity through partnerships. And then with depot and office, there is we should be able to, but then maybe you can. There's a whole process to go through, and I guess there'll be opportunities there for us, and huge growth opportunities really with those customers. So being sort of 24 months away, that gives us time to plan, and I guess also hopefully get us over the semiconductor issue as well.
But I think we can't be complacent though, because I think what we've really got to do is, I'm talking to those customers now about it, because by the time it happens, they won't be my customers anymore. They'll be transitioned into the CAMs, won't they? But I want to start the conversation now so that they're comfortable and they understand the fact that we just don't want to be with you for your ICE vehicles. We want to be part of that transition, basically.
Absolutely, and that's what we are striving to do. Okay. So when going back to if we take places for people, obviously when we went to retender,
Mm.
what can you just talk through the process a little bit there, and probably more around who was involved, the different
Yeah, sure.
roles.
Yeah. So basically, when we did that, I think I've alluded to, I like a collaborative approach. I think it's really important. And so when the tender came up, the first thing I did was I spoke to Diane Savage because she was their account manager
Yep.
before. So Diane became part of the team immediately. We then involved, because of the complexity of the fleet, I got Ross involved straight away because I knew that would be important. I actually got Smeeta involved as well because I knew that there'd be a need for 360. And then we also involved people like I've forgotten his bloody name. I can believe Phil Turl for the maintenance and things like that, because that was an issue they had before. So if you like, I gathered together a group of people internally, first of all, where we then went through the tender to make sure we were comfortable with it, felt we could apply to it. And then I asked them to take little bits away and come back to me so that I could collectively put together a joint response. And that worked really well. I do that with most of the large ones. Once we got through to that point, what we then had to think about was the conversions. So we then spoke to Bristore. The rationale for that was they were using Bristore anyway. They'd used them before. They were really comfortable with them. We knew that they wanted Peugeots. There was a change from the Fords they had. So we got Peugeot involved, and they suggested Robinson Day in Manchester to be the delivering dealer. So they got involved as well. So the irony was, the implementation meeting really reflected our pre-tender meeting, ironically, But and then what we thought about were what are the areas of concentration. I also got director buy-in, and that Ian was really keen on this one, and he got involved straight away as well. And actually, Phil Ringeth was involved as well. He did some slides for me and that sort of stuff, some bespoke slides. We looked at, so what are they asking us for? So we got through the first stage, which was a pricing process and also a qualitative response. Then we knew that the top three would then go through to basically to a face-to-face presentation. And
sorry, just to, So in terms of the tender came out, or will be contacted directly and said, we're going out to tender again, we'd like you to tender, or what was that?
No, it came through the CPPL framework.
That's right. Okay. So you look at the tender, you get your group together, you complete the tender, and you submit it. There's no contact as such places for people at that.
No. Okay. Not allowed to.
No.
Yeah.
And then, so the first time is when you do this presentation.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So who you sat across the table from?
Okay, so we had the procurement director. And we had two ladies who run the fleet. Basically. We had an HR, a couple of sort of internal fleet managers. We had one of the HR managers as well. And there was one other. Who else was it? Oh, well, of course, finance guy. Finance, he wasn't finance director at the time. He is now, but he was a finance manager as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a procurement director that actually ran the whole process.
Yeah. So it's the procurement director ran the process.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's cool. And just as a side note, is that what you find with public sector, that it's procurement led?
Yes.
Yeah. And
it's either procurement.
Yeah.
It's normally procurement, or it can be. It can come from a number of areas, but mostly procurement. Yeah.
No,
or it's sometimes compliance as well.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because there are a lot of customers that we have that would like just to renew with us immediately.
Yeah.
But it will be their compliance team that say, sorry, you can't do that. You've got to go back to tender again, basically. Yeah.
And so compliance in this case is following is complying with government guidelines.
Public sector rules. Yeah.
Okay. And when you had that meeting, so I guess the procurement director was the dominant person in that meeting.
Yeah, he led.
Yeah.
He led for most of it. It was interesting, actually, because when we actually got into the presentation of 360, it was then the two ladies who were known to us and knew Diane, who actually were then digging deep into what can this system now do. And so it was nice because it transitioned from, if you like, a theoretical process to something which is a reality. And this is what it actually does, as it were.
Okay. And obviously that meeting, so that was when we were down to final three, wasn't it?
Yeah, so from our side, we had Ian Turner came. I was there, Diane was there, and Paul Lomas was my boss at the time. He came as well. Yeah.
Okay. So what was the next stage after that? Was that to a straight
award? Yeah. We were awarded, and then we went straight into an implementation. Implementation first meeting was up there in Preston. Where we brought implementation lead, which was Smeeta, obviously, and we also brought people from the care team with us as well. Remembering this is in the good old Northampton days as well. So it was like the team leader and the actual team person that was going to run their account from Northampton that came. And they did a brilliant job, to be fair. But we won't labour on
that point. So we've said they've got about 1,600 vehicles. Quite LCV heavy. Do you know approximately what the split is?
Probably cars against LCVs is going to be 80 to 20%. LCVs 80%.
And the LCVs, I guess, racking may have beacons, stuff like that. So there's some ancillary stuff in there.
Livery,
Is there anything? Do they have anything that's sort of specialist or?
No, actually, see, that was one of the things that actually helped us to win it, in that we persuaded them that there wasn't such a great need. When we first went to tender, there was something like 12 or 13 different trade vehicles that they wanted different specifications on. So one of the things that we came back to them with was that these two are so similar, and these two are so similar that you're going to save yourself money if you actually rationalise and homogenise some of these. So they just have 6 now, basically. So they've got 6 vehicle types. They've got 6 vehicle types now. And what we've done is it's a bit smoke and mirrors, really, but because you can't order a van plus conversion through 360, what we've done is we've lodged an Excel spreadsheet on their 360, which is like, they can just download it, tick the boxes, and they can immediately order vehicles, basically. And they're comfortable with that, basically. They use a lot of rental vehicles, and so the ability for them to access the rental platform through 360 is really important. They also use very heavily, accident management as well. And so being able to access that through 360 is really important to them also. So it's and we do also driver training with them, and we do driver license checks, all that sort of stuff as well. So they take most of the product that we have, quite honestly. I think the only thing they don't take is ProFleet.
I was just actually going to ask you about ProFleet, if that is something, because I would have thought those types of vehicles would have been ideal for ProFleet's use.
You see, the big problem we've got with ProFleet is that we don't actually market it as a standalone product. And if we did, we do have a lot more penetration in public sector. I see on a daily basis tenders for tracking. So what will tend to happen is that when prices for people came to us, they already had a tender, a contract in place for tracking, which had some years to run on it still, basically. So it was really a question of just taking the trackers off the old vehicles and putting them onto the new vehicles, rather. So we couldn't have competed for that particular tender because we don't do it as a standalone. I mean, there are some now. I mean, I've got 2 that I'm working on at the moment. 3, in fact, that are taking the trackers as well, but it's not the norm. It tends to come later, one might say. And I mean, we are really cost effective with ProFleet. It's a bloody brilliant product in terms of cost for the customer, but I just wish to God we would do it as a standalone product, and then we'd get a lot more business.
And I suppose if we separated out that tender process, we can't even we've got the vehicles, then go for that tender when it's up for renewal. Because
Yeah.
we'd be in a situation when it's separate, and if God forbid we were to lose that contract, we might still have the
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we actually won a tender for telematics on Crown Commercial Services. We actually pitched for it and got in there, but didn't do a single bit of business because my brief was we will only do telematics to vehicles that we lease as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was never concurrent, unfortunately. It didn't happen. So we didn't retender.
So no, that's good. So a couple more sort of general questions. With public sector, is it always sole supply or can
No.
it be multi-supply?
No, I mean, to give you an example, the best example is Northumbria Healthcare.
Yeah.
They're multi-supply.
Yeah.
They have a fleet of nearly 30,000 vehicles. They'll place orders for somewhere in the region of 12 to 15,000 vehicles during 2022.
Yeah.
And they are therefore, out of necessity, multi-supply, one might say. And so, but Wheatley Group, who we've just won, Places for People, they'll be sole supply.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a multiplicity of differences, basically. I would say most of the tenders we win will be for sole supply.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so why? So some very quick sort of general questions. Why do you think customers choose us?
Well, most of the customers that we win in terms of tender, it's because of the way that we price and we actually pitch ourselves. So a lot of it, there's more and more influence on the qualitative element of tenders in public sector than there used to be. It was always just a numbers game, but it's changed quite considerably. And so I think we've now keyed into the psyche of the public sector, and we understand perhaps better the importance of certain elements, and that is partnership, longevity, value for money, obviously moving to EVs and the way that we would handle that and the whole process behind that, more importantly, and the importance of their fleet within our makeup. And I think this is something that we weren't very good at one time, because we'd sort of blithely talk about having 150,000 vehicles, and some of the smaller people would such say, well, they're too big for us, sort of thing, Whereas now the way I approach it is I talk about our public sector portfolio, which ranges from one vehicle to 1,000 vehicles sort of thing, and anywhere in between. And so, there is as much care paid for the one vehicle as there is for 100 vehicles. So it's all about trying to, the way that we respond can't be totally formulaic. It has to be quite individual.
Yeah.
And so therefore what we do, I mean, off the record, one might say, is that I do all the tenders. I don't let Tracy do them at all. And that isn't no slight to Tracy whatsoever. It's just I think each one needs a different approach. Yeah. So it's a pain in the bum. It takes a lot of my time. But it bears fruit, though, doesn't it? So so I think it's best to actually think about who they are. I do quite a lot of research into understanding what the company's about, what the organisation's about, what their background is, how they're made up, before I respond, basically. Yeah. So hopefully I'm trying to tickle the psyche of the business as well as just responding to the tender.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you said about research. So the research that you do. So if we flip that around, what do you think the customers or potential customers, do they do a lot of research as part, or do they just rely on the tender?
No, they rely very heavily upon the tender management teams.
Yeah.
So with CCS, TPPL, and also with Health and Housing, each of them has a group of people, and they'll go and sit with you as a customer and talk you through how the tender process works, what's the best way to do it, what questions you need to ask, and that sort of thing. And so they will hopefully give them very clear view about what's happening in the marketplace. Yeah. I'm not completely convinced that it works to their best advantage, because I do truthfully believe that sometimes they're steered towards manufacturers where the reality is the framework holders are getting the best bang for buck. But there we go.
Yeah.
But
But
when they get to that point of the tender being issued, they got very clear questions that we need to answer, which have been generated by that framework group, basically on their behalf. And so they will do the research for them. And they have to have comfort in the knowledge that we, as a supplier, and all the other suppliers, have had to go through the tender process to get where we are. You know, and so we're not sort of like, as I said before, chopped liver. Hopefully, you know.
So it's just thinking about that framework group that helps them. You know. Should we be trying to target those with sort of brand awareness type activities and value-adding content?
I include them in all of my campaigns. Always include them. Always do. So whenever, for instance, Phil says we're doing a campaign on X, Y, and Z, I always make sure that, you know, because I've got them set up as prospects, even though they're never going to come to fruition. I've done that on purpose, you know, so that I know that they will always get information about what we're doing, and they'll always be up to date with where we are and who we are. So
just to jump that very quickly, from our point of view, so we're going to be investing more in paid advertising on LinkedIn, for example, so placing ads. Those types of people, their job roles and the organisations they work for, we need to make sure we factor those in. So offline, what we'll do is just look at those job roles.
Yeah, sure.
Could you just give me a couple of examples of the job titles that these people have?
Yeah, gosh, off the top of my head, no, but I will send you them.
No, that's cool.
Not a problem.
Oh, great. Okay, so last
because they're all a bit sycophantic, quite honestly.
What do you think makes us unique in the market? If we are unique,
we're not unique.
No,
and I think that's important as well. The moment you start saying we're totally different from everybody else, you lose all capacity to actually tell them truth. You know, because most of the suppliers in the marketplace are set up along very similar lines. They're doing the same job. Okay, what makes you different is basically the way you actually apply yourself to doing that job, and more importantly, how much pain you can take away from your customer during that process. You know, so if you can actually try to prove to your customer or potential customer, your prospect, that we do all the things that Fred does, but what will happen is you'll get far fewer complaints from your drivers because they'll be talking to us as there's an issue, you know, or our product works in such a way that we'll be able to give you warning about there being a problem. You know what I mean? So the reality is we're not really that different from anybody else. And I think, and I always say that to customers, you know, I said, look, you know, it is, we're all very similar in our approach. We do a very similar job. The difference is probably how we access funding and therefore the cost of funding and things like that. Ultimately, what you want is a vehicle for 3 years and you want no pain. So it's the judgment as to whether or not you have pain during that 3 years that we live and stand and fall by, isn't it, really? You know?
No, absolutely. And I think that one of my questions, what do you think they want from their leasing partner? I guess it's as little pain as possible. Yeah.
I mean, if all they want is for it to do what it says on the tin, basically. I have got a contract hire vehicle for 36 months, and part of that process is it will be managed by ALD. And if it truly is managed by ALD with as little pain as possible, then that would be great. You know, that will work.
So one question I have is around emerging trends. Now, obviously, electrification. But where does mobility as a service, you know, we see lots of things coming out. Yes, there's car share, you know, from car share to subscription to scooters and e-bikes. And I guess some of the public sector organisations actually have quite large campuses, MOD, whatever. Is there, you know, and what do you think over the next 5 years that we should really be thinking about that's beyond what we're doing today?
So, I mean, I think mobility as a product is something which is already talked about at very high levels
Mm.
in public sector. And let me give you a useful analogy. Kent County Council have put out a request for information, because what they're doing is they're moving from 2 very large buildings
Mhm.
into a smaller building because of flexible working,
Yeah.
where the car park is going to be considerably smaller.
Yeah.
There will be much less opportunity for people to actually drive to work.
Yeah.
And they're looking for solutions to actually managing the way that their people get to and from work. Okay. And they're not putting any limits. It's a complete blue sky process that they're
Yeah.
looking for people to actually do. And the sort of suggestions they're talking about are obviously pool fleets,
Yeah.
car sharing, mobility allowances,
Yeah.
and all this sort of thing. And I think that we're in a great position in that it's clear that a lot of these mobility products are already being trialled by centres around the world.
Yeah.
What I personally find really frustrating is that we don't seem to be able to get them into the UK quickly enough.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about them. I mean, and car share has been in the UK for bloody years, hasn't it? I mean, my son was at uni. Car share was in place in Leeds, where he was at, you know, but
Yeah.
and it needs, so if we actually want to keep up with trends, we need to be at the forefront of some of these areas.
Yeah.
And I would love to be able to go into a tender and actually say to them, well, actually, to be honest, do you really need this tranche of vehicles? Would it not be better for you to have a managed process in place whereby you simply use an RFT card to open the vehicle, and it's charged directly to the cost centre of that human being, you know, and it's not beyond the realms of reason, because it can be done already in the UK by Swift Car and people like that, can't it?
Yeah.
And that's what we need to bring in place. It's so important we get that in place. And the whole concept of mobility as a product is really important, because, you know, I was talking to a guy in Holland from ALD who wanted to know how we dealt with municipal organisations. And they're talking about a mobility card, aren't they, you know, over there?
Yes.
Where it's not, the vehicle is no longer important. It's the fact that you can get from A to B in all different ways, isn't it?
Yes.
That's important, you know? But that construct brings with it the necessity for a really, really robust IT platform, and that makes me frightened when I think about ALD in the UK, quite honestly.
Well, you never know. We're inching towards that. So I think one last question, which one? Okay. So if you were to list out the 3 to 5 challenges that your public sector fleets are facing, so
Yeah.
bang, 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 what would they be?
Well, obviously electrification at the moment. No, let's put that in a bigger global thing. Decarbonisation is not just electrification. It's decarbonisation is number one. Number two is a big HR issue that they've got, in terms of they would all like to have trackers on their vehicles, and they'd all like to have home charging.
Yeah.
And there's a huge amount that they've got to sort out before either of those will actually work for them, basically. And the third, which maybe should be the first, is that moving from the traditional way of thinking for public sector. So more and more people are bringing in private sector experts to actually run certain elements of it. The problem that it's now throwing up is they very blithely sacked their fleet managers, and now you've got people that don't understand anything about vehicles who are running their fleets. And so when it comes to that process of choosing who the successor will be of your current supplier, there's a great lack of real understanding and expertise now. And so I see that as an opportunity, in that we can actually go as an honest broker a long time prior to them actually going to tender and actually talking about what we can supply, this is what's happening in the world and all that sort of thing, you know. So, but those are the issues, I think. It's huge.
No, that's cool. And then the final question is, if you had and we've talked, we're going through planning and stuff, but if there were 2 or 3 things that you want from us in marketing, what would those 2 or 3 real key things be?
Okay, well, you've already said that you're going to be doing the paid stuff on LinkedIn, and that's been so powerful from my point of view, because a lot of people have recognised it and seen it, and it's helped in terms of brand awareness massively, because there's a lot of sycophants involved in public sector, and they like to see their own names and like to be associated, and that's why quite a lot, when people sort of like post something, I'll quite often share it just because I know it'll give them a buzz, basically, more than anything else. So that's really important. I think that I'm really excited by the process that you and I are going through at the moment, and that is actually compiling a proper plan. And that's what we've never had before for public sector. And so what I'd like to say is that I feel confident about what we're doing for 2022. And I think midway through 2022, we should be looking to 2023, trying to already see what the outcomes are from what we're doing now, to try and predict what we should be doing for that year. I know that's difficult, but we will then get a clearer view about things like the semiconductors and about availability of electric vehicles and things like that, because I think we need to have consultancy and marketing aligned so that we can be, I don't want us to be the last person in the queue in terms of talking about those buzz things. You need to be ahead of the game. And if we can do that, it just adds to the whole verisimilitude, basically, of the whole thing, doesn't it, basically?
No, agreed. I mean, if I had my way, I wouldn't be thinking about tomorrow. I'd be thinking about 12, 24 months ahead. And because actually, if we're doing that, the pipeline of the future becomes the lead of tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I know it's difficult because of budgets at the moment and things like that, isn't it? Because it's all a bit COVID affected, isn't it? But it's encouraging that we clearly have done very well during 2021 as a business, isn't it? And I was shocked when I saw the email about the bonus. Were you? I was really surprised. Really surprised.
That was good. That was good.
Yeah, I mean, that's a shot in the arm for everybody, isn't it? But I mean, what I would say is that I'm encouraged, delighted, really happy with being with you guys' involvement in public sector, and the more we can do, the better. I look forward to Ollie being on board as well, which would be great. The only thing that is missing really is that Alex was my sounding board. Like she and I used to have sort of. We'd throw ideas at each other and things like that, and she'd come back to me. I sometimes used to get messages in the middle of the night from her saying, "I've been thinking about this, and what do you think of that?" And it's great, and that sort of isn't there anymore.
No.
And I found that a real stimulus, if you know what I mean.
Well,
now, I don't want to monopolise people's time or anything like that, but I would like to. I mean, I'm not sure whether Ollie will be expertise enough or whether it should be Phil or what, but if I get an idea, I'd like to know who I should share that with, if you see what I mean.
Well, I mean, share with the group.
Okay.
What I've tended to do, not public sector stuff so much, but I've actually sent it on LinkedIn. I'll ping it over to Phil, maybe the whole big team, maybe just Mark. Zoe, whatever, you can do that. So if you see anything as a good idea or anything like that, just share that. And maybe what we'll do is put a little bit of a loose process in place where we kind of just get together every now and again, and it can be in an ad hoc way. You say, I've got some ideas on the chat through, let's do 30 minutes. So you can schedule that in, or vice versa. So.
Yeah, and it'd be good for me to give you guys feedback as well, wouldn't it?
No, actually,
in the process,
Yeah. And what we'll do is, now that we're building the campaigns more robustly, there'll be that process and touch points that we'll be meeting up more anyway once we've got it up and running.
Cool.
Okay.
Excellent.
Right, well, thank you. I shall leave
No problem. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, lovely, brilliant. Thank you, and I will start digesting all this.
Okay.
And what we'll do is, we use the video with Ollie and with the agency. I'll see if I need to edit anything out first.
That's a good point.
And then
chopped liver, I said many times, didn't I?
And then we'll use this to help with the campaign development and any other ideas. So no, that's brilliant. Thank you. Right.
No worries. Thank you very much. Cheers, Jonathan. Have a
Cheers,
good day.
and you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.